Hello, Martyn. It's amazing to have you on my podcast.
Hi, no, thank
And
you. Thank you for the invite, and it's really nice to see you again.
we have been friends, I can say friends for a
Yes,
while.
yeah, absolutely.
when first time we met was when you were an MP for Scottish National Party. And of course, that was back in 2024, before the elections were called up. And yeah, you were telling me some of the most interesting stuff I've ever heard about election analytics. And then I went home and tried to digest all that, but I feel like I still didn't get
Well,
I still didn't get the substance of it.
happy to share. Happy to share any of my thoughts on any aspects you want to interrogate me on. So just fire away.
I remember you were telling me about the strategies you use in order to win elections.
Yes.
Like in terms of how many voters do you actually need to in the first past the post system, how many voters do you actually have to convince to vote for yourself, and how many voters you can just ignore them as long as
Yeah.
others are secured.
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. Well, that's it. It's all about all political campaigning is about building relationships with people, and to win on any system, you need to get votes in the ballot box. And first past the post, it's a simple majority, which means you could win an election with a fairly derisory share of the vote, as long as you have one vote more than your nearest opponent. So you don't need to be massively popular, you just have to be the least despised almost in some respects. So
Okay, yeah.
so
We
once
can put it this way.
once you accept that, it's all about getting as many of your supporters as you can to turn out and vote for you. So you don't need to. In fact, it's counterproductive in the heat of an election to noise up people who are diametrically opposed to your views. Because if you encourage them to vote, they will vote for one of your opponents, quite possibly tactically for the opponent best placed to beat you, and it's very negative. So it pays to you need to speak to these people in between elections to try and persuade them and bring them round and know if they're changing their views, but you don't want to speak to them in the white heat of a immediacy of a campaign. So with all that information you have from years of going round the doors, you know people that have told you 3 and 4 times that they're not voting for you. So you would not go near those people during the closing stages of an election campaign, because just by being on their doorstep would typically increase the likelihood of them voting perhaps by as much as 10%. So that would be counterproductive to you. But going to the door of a supporter or somebody sympathetic to you would be perhaps 10% more likely to turn out, because you've engaged with them, reminded them it's on, told them that their vote is really important for you to get back. All of that makes a difference. And you could think of this like a football manager. I've successfully ran and been elected in 7 different electoral contests, but the last one wasn't successful. So 1 out of 8 failures, not a bad ratio, but you're only as good as your last result. So I am now between seats, for want of a better expression.
Yeah, but what's the math behind that? What's the percentage of votes that you need to win in order to win in the election, or what's the percentage of people you need to convince to vote for you?
It's all very different, because it is, as I said earlier, a simple majority. So 1 vote more than your nearest opponent. And in many respects, it's not a particularly representative form of democracy. It is democratic because people can vote for whoever they want and anyone can stand for election. So all the tenets of democracy are there, but the outcome isn't particularly proportionate, because each area has 1 rep. There are advantages to that, because you build a relationship with that community and everybody knows they go to you. But it means the diversity of opinions that you have in the society are not necessarily reflected, because I don't want to bore people with mathematics, but if it's the best example, because one of the closest contests I had was my first ever council election. So I'm going back to 1999, first past the post result. in those days. In Scotland
That's
now,
a long time ago.
a long time ago. Nowadays, we don't have first past the post elections for councils. We have a single transferable vote system electing multiple councillors, which is fairer. But in the days when I was first elected, that was how it was, old-fashioned first past the post. And I was elected on an 84% turnout. It might have been the highest council turnout in the country. It was on the same day as the Scottish Parliament, so people were coming out to vote for the Parliament election, and that boosted the turnout quite a bit. And I was in an area that had a higher number of, shall we say, affluent people who were more likely to vote, a higher number of older people who were also more likely to vote, and a community that was engaged, which also meant it was more likely to vote. So every demographic was more likely to vote in the area I was standing in, and it was a huge turnout. I scraped in on my first election with a council vote majority of 21 votes, and I had 34% of the vote. My nearest opponent had 33.5%, right? So if you take that, I wasn't the popular choice of the majority of the people that elected me. Now, there's an
it makes sense.
There's an inherent problem there. Now, in mathematical terms, they would talk about the effective vote. So the effective vote to get, I had, and just to give you the numbers, I had 1,040 votes. So effectively, 1,019 or 1,020 of them were effective. If I'd got 1,020 votes, I would have won by one. So I had 20 votes more than I needed, surplus votes. So they didn't really count. They just added to my very slender majority. And basically, the other, let me just do my maths, 66.5% of the, not 76, sorry, 66.5% of the population's votes were what we would call wasted. They voted for candidates that didn't get elected. So you had basically 2/3 of the electorate's vote was either wasted because it didn't count to getting anyone elected, or was surplus, albeit very few were surplus. So the effective vote was tiny. And
it would make sense to make those people vote again to see who really is the most popular candidate.
And that's
to choose between the two.
To choose between the two, yeah. And that is now what effectively happens in Scotland with the single transferable vote. And it's the same in the London Assembly elections and the Welsh Assembly and Northern Ireland. So there's now an STV vote, and between 3 and 4 candidates will get elected if they reach the quota, and votes transfer, so that the people need to get that quota to be elected. And I think that is inherently fairer. I can't, that's the positive side. The negative side, of course, is that I haven't seen the evidence, and this has been in place since, let me think, 2008 in Scotland. I haven't seen the evidence that it's led to a more consensual and cooperative style of politics. You still have the Yaboo sucks and the personality clashes and everything that you had under first past the post, but at least more people have someone that they support as an elected representative, and that has to be better. I just wish it was more consensual.
Certainly makes sense for you, but it's always been interesting for me how you run in the Scottish National Party, right?
Yeah.
And not many people consider this as a party. Of course, not many people consider it as a party that's going to take many seats constantly. But what are the main goals that drive this party forward?
The main goal, and the reason I joined the SNP, I didn't join because I wanted a career in politics. In fact, that was probably the last thing on my mind when I did join. I joined because the SNP was founded to get an independent Scotland. So it was all about delivering Scottish independence, and I believed in that as a philosophy and way of life. Now, I was a cultural nationalist. In my early years, I loved the history and the folk music, and I took a similar interest in the history and folk music in that of other countries. So it's in many ways an internationalist as well. But I believe passionately that Scotland was a nation, and that the best people to make decisions for any nation are the people of that nation. And that's why I became a political nationalist as well as a cultural nationalist. And I got involved in the late 1980s, which wasn't a good time for Scottish nationalism. We were floating around 10, 11, 12% in the opinion polls at the early part when I joined, so it was not a career move. You didn't join. Here's a movement on the up. It was very much.
Yeah, which is why I asked. It's really interesting.
Very much a movement that was stagnant, and I believed that we should be independent. And I thought, well, if people like myself don't get off our backsides and do something about it, it won't happen. So I joined, and I think there's a bit of thornness. I don't know if that's a word that's known by your viewers. Thornness, sort of. Trying to think of the English translation for that. Just awkwardness, rebelliousness, and I think in the Scottish people that we like the underdog, and nobody's going to tell us you can't do something or whatever. So you sort of rebel against that. So if anything, my joining at a time when it was at a low point was probably typical of that Scottish attitude that, we'll see about this.
Was it just an act of rebellion?
Yes, we'll see about this.
For you to join the party.
This party's not going anywhere. I'll soon see about that. And the rest, as they say, is history. I then suggested that things should be done differently in the local branch on a number of organisational things, and it was all common sense stuff, by the way. I wasn't reinventing the wheel. It's just that in the late 1970s, the SNP had kind of fallen off the cliff after we didn't get devolution, and people's energy was sapped. They were disillusioned. They felt it wasn't going anywhere, and there was some splits as well, and all that didn't help. So sort of a decade later, we were still coming out of that period, and a lot of the people that had been really good organisers and been really active had either dropped out of activity or had just got too old. There was a few of them there, but there weren't enough to lift it up. So people like myself coming in and helping made a difference. And we didn't reinvent the wheel, because what I thought, why don't we do this or do that, were things that the people before me had been doing 15, 20 years earlier. So I was just getting people back on track. And from that, a decade or so later, I stood for the council, as I said, in 1999 and got elected by the skin of my teeth. I built my vote up. I got a much bigger majority the next time, 450 votes majority, better than 21. And of course, lots of naysayers, you always get them, told me, you're going to get beat, Martyn, you're not going to hold the seat with that majority. And I'd been at more than 21 friends and families' funerals in that 5 years. So you could say, well, I could see how it's dropped. This could be fatal, but it wasn't, because we'd done the work. And as we said, we'd gone out and we'd knocked all the doors. We'd spoke to almost 80% of the electorate in that 5 years. And we knew people that were rock solid. We knew people that were not aligned. We knew folk that wouldn't have touched me for a barge pole, if I'd been on fire, they wouldn't have put me out. They just didn't want to know us. So you knew to ignore them, you knew to pull out the ones that were ours, and you knew to go back and engage with the ones that were neutral. And we were able to do that, and we got a thumping majority the next time. And then, I was re-elected the next time after that, but they changed the system on me. And that's when they brought in the single transferable vote multi-member system. And the wards all changed, and I was successfully re-elected with a vote, a good share of the vote. We had the largest share of my party, but we just missed out getting the 2 seats out of the 3-member ward. My fellow councillor was a man named Tam Smith, still alive, a lovely guy, real community-focused guy. He was a councillor before I was. He lost out, and I gained. And because of the single transferable vote, and I know, I'm grateful for the support I got, and Tam gave me huge support. But people that we tried to tell to vote for Tam voted for me. My name was alphabetically higher. This is the problem you have with STV, that people, if they're voting for a party, will vote down the ballot paper. So the alphabetically advantaged candidate gets a disproportionate share of the party vote. We also were the only party standing 2 candidates. And there's another problem if you've got multiple candidates. This affects every party